can spend 70 to 80% of the time doing the things that you really enjoy, you're going to be more engaged. And if you're going to be more engaged, you're going to be more productive. You're going to be more productive. You're probably going to make the firm much more profitable. It's just getting people into those and understanding that. They had the exact same title. I just kind of reallocated their time on how they need to spend it, fitting it towards their strengths.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSalle here, CEO of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And I'm very excited to bring you our guest today, Tammy Lee. Tammy and I, we've probably had, I don't know, two or three calls at least. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and serving each other's clients. And finally, we were like, hey, let's hop on the pod and bring you on the show. And what I think you'll really like about Tammy is not only does she run a business that could be very helpful and insightful for all of you listening, but she's also in your shoes as well, and is still an advisor running that side of her life. Tammy Lee is the founder of RIA Strategic Implementation and Execution, and she's also a financial advisor at U.S. Capital Wealth Advisors. And with that said, Tammy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise. So I know you mentioned that your business name is a lot and long.
Yeah,
So what do you call it for short?
I call it RIASI for short. I recognize that RA, Strategic Implementation and Execution, is a mouthful. It explains what I do, but no one's going to spell that email address correctly. So my kids have given me a lot of crap that I made up a word, but RIASI is a short name for what my company is.
Well, maybe it will, if it's not already, it will make it in the Urban Dictionary. So it's kind of a real word.
Maybe.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. I would imagine you were a financial advisor before starting your consulting company, but how did you become a financial advisor in the first place?
Even before I was a financial advisor, I actually worked in operations and billing and compliance. I was behind the scenes. I started almost 2 decades ago in financial services, having no background. I was an English and Asian American studies major. Like most 22-year-olds, I did not know what I was going to do. And I was looking for a job out of college that would allow me to not have to move back home. My parents are lovely, but we are better when we were having some boundaries, and to be able to pay my rent, have a little fun, and to pay my student loans. I had a friend who forwarded my resume along to somebody that she knew who worked for a small financial advisory. And they're like, you can come in and do this. And I'm like, I actually don't know the difference between a stock and a bond. I feel like I should know this. And they're like, no, you'll be fine. We'll teach it to you. I'm like, I feel like this is problematic, but sure. Went in for the interview, and they weren't really fazed by that. They said, hey, what we really need you to know how to do is to talk to clients, to prep for meetings really well, to work with different teams, and we will teach you all the processes on how that works. The woman who brought me in was fantastic at training me for about 2 weeks. And then she literally moved halfway around the world. And it was not just sink or swim, tossing me in the deep end. It was sink or swim, tossing me into the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And so I learned a lot by, quite honestly, doing things wrong and asking a lot of questions. And I started by working with the custodians and understanding how their teams worked, understanding how to prep for a meeting, what it meant to be an advisor, to be on the trading team, what a compliance department looks like, what a billing department looks like, and having to work in all these different areas. A couple years into doing that, I was very fortunate to have a mentor who said, I think you need to do more. Not to say that there's anything wrong with operations, but you seem like you can engage in a lot more. So why don't you come and sit with me, and I will teach you everything you need to know about being an advisor. At that point, I had already taken my 7, I had already taken my 66, didn't really know what it meant to be an advisor. I had these licenses, but didn't really know what to do. And this mentor was fantastic in teaching me practical applications of investing for clients and how puts and calls worked. And I did research for him. This was all during the Obama-McCain campaign. And one of the big arguments at the time was on healthcare. And so he was like, research it for me, break it down for me. What's the Democratic argument? What is the Republican argument? How does this affect pharmaceuticals, medical devices, insurance, obviously, all these different areas. And it was really, really helpful for me to see how this was all interconnected. And at the end of this experience, he's like, you're pretty smart. why don't you study for your CFA? And I have great respect for CFAs. I think they're incredibly intelligent and they're the engineers and research engines of finance. I can tell you now, that's just not how my mind works. And I like talking to clients and I like engaging with them. And usually CFAs are a little bit more behind the screen. And so I started doing a little research of like, well, what could I do with this? And I found out about the CFP, and this kind of made a lot of sense. At that point, I get my first client. It's my parents, not shocking. Parents generally want to be supportive of their kids. And my parents were Vietnamese refugees who came to the States, and not uncommon of the immigrant experience, but they started all over from scratch. My dad was a college professor in Vietnam. When he came to the States, those accreditations, graduate degrees were not transferable, and he started as a custodian and worked his way up in the United Methodist Church and eventually became a pastor. But they didn't really know anything about finance. When I asked him, he's like, yeah, I went to the library and looked things up in the encyclopedia. And I'm like, well, that's not the most relevant information. And much thanks to the United Methodist Pension Fund, my parents had a really, really good retirement, but the rest of their financial system was kind of a disaster. It took years of cleaning this up and helping them out. And when me and my siblings went to college, we all went to college on grants and scholarships and student loans. It was a good experience for us to learn how to balance a checkbook and understand bills and fill out our own FAFSA and not to sign up for credit cards just for the swag. But my dad had all these regrets about not being able to help us go to college. And my response to him when he was telling me this was, well, Dad, like none of us are upset and we've all done fine. But he's like, but I wanted to. I wanted to help you be able to do these things. I just didn't know how. Well, why didn't you work with a financial planner or a financial advisor? And his response was, I can't afford that. And I was like, it's not actually as expensive as you think it is. And I think this was a big point for me in realizing I wanted to work with people who were like my parents, who were just trying to give their kids better opportunities and felt like having good quality advice was out of reach for me. So I started studying for my CFP and eventually passed the exam. And the first company I was with was very formative, but they were primarily a small hedge fund shop. And so they didn't need a lot of financial planning. So I moved on to a firm that focused on holistic wealth management. The CEO was also a little bit of a serial entrepreneur. So he had an employee benefits department. He had a retirement planning side. He had all these different areas that I got to work in as the support advisor to the CEO and the managing partner to really support their books of business. And on my end, one of the things that I had going for me was I was one of the few advisors who understood how billing worked. I was one of the few advisors who had done compliance. I was one of the few advisors who understood paperwork really, really well and how to clear an IGO. And so I started operating in that capacity of kind of filling in that gap of being that bridge. And the COO at the time was like, hey, you're really good at this. You like making sure that teams work really well together and you like training people. Come be my director of operations. So I became his director of operations, and it was a great experience and allowed me to really help get rid of silos that exist in every single firm. And the one downside was this was pre-COVID. No one was really well equipped to work remotely. And when I started there, it wasn't that big of a deal. I was commuting a couple days a week, or a couple days a month, and then it became a couple days a week. And I had two really young children. And so by my fifth year there, I was spending on average between 2 to 4 hours in my car on a daily basis, which is just not feasible when you have a 2 and a 4-year-old. And ended on great terms, but moved on just because the commute was killing me and it was not in the best interest of my family, and moved on to another firm that was quite a bit larger and had grown at a rapid pace, but again, had a lot of silos. It had the operations working in one area, had the trading working in another area, had compliance working in another area, and these areas were just not talking to each other. And so what ended up happening was I came in to bridge that gap. I came in to really shore up financial planning, to get the teams to work cohesively together, and to really scale the firm as their COO. And when I left there, I wanted to go and work with other firms and I wanted to have an impact. And I realized that for a lot of firms, the small and the mid-sized firms, they needed to have a clear quarterback who could lead the charge, who could really come in and address the bandwidth issues. I think The blessing and a curse of being an independent is you have the freedom to chart your own pathway. The downside is you often feel like you're on an island and you're stretched to capacity and you just don't have the bandwidth to be able to grow at the speed that you want to grow. And so one of the things that can be done in those situations, you basically have three options. You can look and hire and train somebody new for your staff, but that's time consuming and there's a long break even point. You can bring in some really skilled consultants to develop a strategic plan and then have somebody on your team implement that, but you run the risk of splitting their focus from their current priorities. Or you can create a value-based partnership that brings in skilled implementation. And that's where I come in because I can roll up my sleeves and be a fractional COO in working with these teams and really developing them, focusing on people and capacity, custodian relationships, and service offerings, and build the scaffolding so that you can continue to scale and developing the team members so that they can level up.
There's a lot of things that I love that in what you said. Number one, I'm trying to go back to the beginning and go in order. One is that you jumped in not knowing anything about the industry and
Correct.
had the confidence in yourself / people that were confident in you that helped, I'm sure, develop the confidence in yourself that, hey, you know what, I can give this a shot. And you're probably
Sure.
young and dumb enough to where you were like, hey, whatever, let's try it out, and look where it's brought you now. So that in and of itself is cool. I like also that you continued to progress through the industry with a purpose. And what I mean by that is you were able to see where you mentioned your father, where your father was before he came to the United States, and then where he had to begin when he ultimately did come over here, where he was at the top of the education system, and then he was at the bottom of the education system, so to speak. And seeing that, and then seeing him work and rise up again is just badass, to put it lightly. And
Thanks.
to be able to then use that as fuel to build something of significance and have a purpose yourself like he did is just really cool to hear from the outside looking in. And then furthermore, you start to sort of come into your own as you're at these different firms that you mentioned, and frankly just progress through solving problems. You're like, hey, I see that this is wrong, let's fix it. I see
Yep.
that this is wrong, let's fix it, over and over and over and over again, until I would imagine you're like, hey, I can have a bigger impact outside of just this firm that I happen to be with now. Let me help other advisors at other companies in their own companies do this same thing. So help me understand, when was that inflection point of, hey, I'm going to go and start offering this to other advisors while still maintaining my book
Yep.
of business? When was that inflection point, and what kind of like caused you to say, you know what, I'm doing this? Like, what was that tipping point?
The tipping point was probably in 2021, 2022, but I don't think it was this like light bulb moment where I'm like, okay, this is what I'm doing. I think it built over time. I think part of it was I had a realization that advisors have bandwidth issues. You can serve clients really well to say 100 clients, and then quality of service is going to drop at 105, 110, 115 clients just because you can't serve everybody to the same degree. And I could go out and try to have 100 clients of my own, which would be more lucrative. And I've had quite a few people tell me that. Or what would be more impactful is if I just kept my 27 clients and I helped 3 advisors be really good at building up their books of businesses and their relationships with their clients. That's 300 plus families that we can impact. And I think so. I had realized that during the course of my career, when I was shifting to more of a management position, that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to give up my book of business. Part of the reason was these are people who had worked with me when I was young and green and I didn't have a lot of experience. They put their trust in me, and I wanted to honor the promises I made to provide some peace of mind to them. And I wanted to continue to work with them, but I also didn't feel the need to add to my book. And so I've kept those clients and spent my time working with other folks and really building their books. And then that became, oh, I could actually do this on a grander scale where I'm actually helping the firms be able to do that by setting up the systems where they have the appropriate advisor teams or they have the appropriate operations team and they have the people in their place. And that's how it kind of all came together. My firm launched in 2022. Reality launched in 2022, but I think this was just kind of cumulatively building during the course of my career. And it wasn't like it was a straight trajectory. There were days where I wasn't 100% sure what I was doing, but I had faith of all of this collected knowledge could be beneficial, and I wanted to be able to share it with other people.
Well, I also like too that you mentioned, or I can work with, 3 advisors who all have 100 or 200 or 500 clients each.
Sure.
And, one of the things I appreciate about that is you're very much, and I know this because we've had previous conversations, you're very much focused on quality, and like it feels like you are an extension of their team, not just, hey, let's meet this week and then we'll meet a month from now and then a month from now. Like, you're actually helping them get stuff done. You fly in, you spend time with their team, you interview their team, and like you get in the weeds with them
Yeah.
to the extent that you, if I'm not mistaken, you even help find and hire the person who's going to stick with them, beyond you, because you serve as a bridge to frankly fix their stuff, and then help place someone alongside them, of course, and any other resources they have, I would imagine, but help place someone to take over moving forward.
Yeah.
And if we take you know your long business name that we've already joked about, and then Riasi, I would also boil it down to something super simple that advisors may be like, oh, okay, I get it. You're essentially a fractional COO.
Correct.
You're someone that focuses on the people, the capacity, ranging from the custodians that they're using to the service offering, making sure that the people and the systems are communicating and interacting correctly. So I certainly don't want to put words in your mouth, but help us understand, like, just briefly, because I have a bunch of follow-up questions, but briefly,
Of course.
like, what is it that you do with firms to help them in their operations?
I am the operations expert so that they don't have to be. That's the short version. I will spend the vast majority of the time working with your staff. So if you have somebody who is a senior CSA who in maybe 5 years could be a really, really good director of operations, I work on leveling them up faster, providing them the training and the development, help building the infrastructure so they can scale. Because most of the time, the CEOs of RIAs became the CEOs of these RAs because they wanted to be really good advisors and wanted to be independent. But now you're talking about running a business, you're meeting with clients, you're frequently the CEO who's the CIO, who's the CFO, who's just wearing too many hats. So I come in and co-pilot and I take off some of the things of, vetting your MSP or, figuring out why the data coming in isn't clean, or hey, these are opportunities that we can have a better client experience, or maybe we need to build out the templates so that the meetings are scalable and repeatable and you're not recreating the wheel every single time. And so I work with the different teams, whether they're advisor teams or their operations teams or trading, whatever it is. I work with these different folks so that we can get the best out of everybody.
So I'm smirking as you're going through that, and I have someone in mind that I'll most likely be pulling you into to be able to help, and I'm certainly going to send this podcast episode to him once it's live. But it's interesting because, and you and I had this conversation previous to this recording, in that, like you said, advisors get in the business for, impact and independence and the income potential. And then there's this inflection point where they're like, oh wow, like I actually have a business. I have a firm. Like
Mhm.
I'm past just serving clients. I need to hire and attract and hire and retain good talent. I need to train them. I need to, like you said, wear all these hats and run. And then they realize, there's the other inflection point where they realize, I'm not being an advisor as much as I want to be an advisor. I'm stuck running the business. So one of the things I really like that you said is you're certainly meeting with the CEO, but you're mainly saying, hey,
I
cast a
spend,
vision
I
for
would
me.
say, 80% of my time with the staff. I meet with the CEO and the executive team on a regular basis because they need to know what I'm working on. I don't ever want them to be like, I have no idea what I'm paying Tammy for. No, you need to know what I'm working on. You need to have updates. But at the same time, I also sometimes need you to make decisions. So we actually have a regular cadence that we meet so that we can make sure that we're on the same page. Ideally, this is once a week and it doesn't have to be a long call, but for some firms, they want it to be once every other week or once a month. And I'm willing to work with them on whatever terms in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I want to make sure that everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction at roughly the same speed.
But what a lot of people do, which is why I'm glad you do it differently, is, oh yeah, CEO, yep, just do these things. And they're like, I literally don't have time to do these things. And you're like, "All right, don't worry, I got you. I'm gonna
Yep,
meet with your team. I am going to be an extension of you. I am going to feel, it's going to feel like I am a team member. I'm not just a consultant. I am in the weeds with these folks,
yep,
and they have access to me. So I really like that. So the questions that I have, or I guess the first question that I have around this topic is, when you go into a firm,
sure.
what are the top problems that you come across? I'm sure they're similar. I mean, every firm is unique to a degree, but they're not as unique necessarily as they like to think they are. There's usually some common problems that you come across. What would those be?
There's lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities. And so things frequently get handed to the person who's standing closest to that advisor, not necessarily who has the most capacity or who's most capable. A lot of things were set 5, 10, 15 years ago and have not been updated. I've worked with firms who have told me that they have not updated their pricing schedule since 2005. And so they're still undercharging clients and continuing with this model. And a lot of times I think their technology is not set up to drive. I am 5'1", my husband is 5'9" ish. When he gets into the car after me, it's annoying. His knees are going to hit the dashboard. Right? If I get in the car after him, I can't reach the pedals. A lot of times firms buy technology because they think it's going to solve a problem and it's going to allow them to go fast and they're going to drive it well. But it's only set up for one person. And then no one else knows how to drive it and use it to the maximum efficiency. And it's kind of like, but you never set it up so that you could drive it well. It's just the one person who does that. And then everybody else is kind of fumbling through trying to drive a car where the mirrors aren't set up. They can't quite reach the pedals. They can't quite see over the dashboard. And they're frustrated of like, why we're paying a lot of money for this. Why isn't it working the way that we want it to work?
Do you find too that, because I see this a lot, that there are certain team members that are great people, that are very talented. They're just on the wrong seat on the
All the
bus.
time. All the time. I think we have certain ideas of what roles should look like. And there's a framework. There's always a framework. But we get into the mindset of it has to look this way. And I think financial services is constantly evolving and growing. And I think most of the time, because the CEOs are busy, they don't have the time to sit back and be like, this isn't actually the best role for this person. And this is where I come in and try to address that. There's a quote that is often attributed to Einstein, although I'm not sure he said it, but it says, everyone is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to live its whole life thinking that it's stupid. I'm trying to figure out who's a fish. I'm trying to figure out who is in the wrong position and trying to make sure that they're set up really well to do that. And I think a lot of times when I'm working with firms, they'll tell me a little bit. I spend a lot of time interviewing the staff as I get to know them and then realizing I'm like, oh, you would be a much better fit doing it this way. And it's not to say that you don't learn some base skills. One of the teams that I worked with, there were two different members on the operations team, and there was a woman who was not the tech savviest, but she was great with clients. Clients loved talking to her. She was very reassuring. She was also a little bit older, so she understood a lot of their technology pitfalls. Right? And she did great on the phone with them. But she struggled. And I asked her to create a spreadsheet or a pivot table, it was just kind of a mess. On the other end, I had somebody else on the operations team who was really, really good at spreadsheeting. He was really good at building out all these systems. But every time he got on the phone, I kept on thinking, oh God, I hope we don't get fired. I hope we don't get fired. I hope we don't get fired. It was just so painful. And so part of it was kind of reallocating their time. What I ended up doing was having this woman spend the majority of her time on the phone because she enjoyed it and she felt like she was doing something that made a difference and was really gratifying to her. And then separately, I wanted her to build up her skills. So I sent her to an Excel crash course. On the same end, for this gentleman who is really good at building out spreadsheets and building out infrastructure and technology, he spent the vast majority of his time doing that. And then we had mock calls on a weekly basis because I needed him to build up that base level of being able to communicate with clients really well. So I'm trying to address both sides. You're never going to get something where you do 100% of what you want to do and enjoy doing 100% of the time. That's just not life. We're all adults. We all pay taxes. We all wash the dishes. We all take out the trash. But if you can spend 70 to 80% of the time doing the things that you really enjoy, you're going to be more engaged. And if you're going to be more engaged, you're going to be more productive. You're going to be more productive. You're probably going to make the firm much more profitable. It's just getting people into those positions and understanding that they had the exact same title. I just kind of reallocated their time on how they needed to spend it, fitting it towards their strengths and playing to that.
Well, it seems to, and again, this is released via audio, so I feel like I always need to disclose as I'm smirking, but I'm smirking as you're talking because all the things that you mentioned, particularly what stood out is things like helping that woman with Excel, where you were probably helping her yourself and then sending her to a little crash course, to the other gentleman who wasn't good on the phone, where you were doing mock calls with him, to frankly, yes, increase his skill set, but honestly increases confidence, because if he wasn't
Yeah.
good on the phone, he probably lacked confidence and you were there to build him up. A CEO of a firm who also has a book of business just doesn't have the time. And what can oftentimes happen is on their end, they've figured it out. They're like, well, why can't you just figure it out? Like, just go do it. And they can lack empathy. That lack of empathy could come off as a temperament issue or anger issue or being dismissive.
Sure.
And then it spills down to actually affecting the culture within the company,
Exactly.
all because in a understandable way, that person doesn't have the time. So then they bring in someone like you who actually can, figuratively put their arms around, the team
Sure.
members and actually help train and develop them. And we haven't talked about this, but I would guess if I was a betting man, which I hate gambling, but if I was, I would bet that there's been more than one instance where the people who have hired you have tried to hire you full time to keep you on, because they're like, no, 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 don't leave, because you've had
And
such an
I'm
impact.
flattered, but it's not my business model. My starting point was wanting to help provide really good quality financial advice to everybody. That's what started with my parents. And I stay with one firm, I can only affect the firm or the clients within that firm. But if I could work with a number of firms, that's really good quality advice that can affect a lot of people, who can make a lot of people's lives better. And so I try to set it up in a way so that while it's planned obsolescence on my end, I'm not leaving you holding the bag the day I leave. I will help either develop the staff that you have in order for them to level up, or I will find the person and work with the different relationships that I have to bring somebody into that role. We can extend contracts so that I ease out of it and onboard the other person at the same time. I want to give them the runway to be successful. But I think a lot of times the issue is that you get stuck in this like, oh, we should just work with this one person. This one person might be really great. And I'm honored and I'm flattered, but I also strongly believe I'm not the smartest person in the room. Somebody else is going to be able to see things that I can't see. And I want them to come in with a fresh set of eyes and be like, oh, Tammy took it this far. And I'm going to pick up the baton from here and I'm going to take us even farther. It makes so much more sense than me trying to hold on to it myself.
And to have that self-awareness, I think, is key, and humbleness, frankly, because oftentimes people would come in and be like, no, I'm the consultant and I know everything and you should listen to me. And you're like, no, I know a lot of things and I'm going to help you a ton, but my goal is to set up the foundation and then some, and to empower someone else to take it even further. I like that. And I think what you offer and what you provide is super helpful, particularly for the CEOs and firm owners who wake up one day and they're like, oh crap, I actually have a business I need to run and I'm not just in charge of my clients. And those people, they wake up stressed out, they go to bed stressed out, they're overwhelmed a lot of times. And you probably give them a breath of fresh air once they get in the groove and
And
working
I
with
think
you.
for a lot of them, they're really well intentioned, but they don't have the time. They'll bring in junior advisors or support advisors, whatever we want, associate advisors, whatever we want to title them, saying, hey, this is somebody who can help take on some of my, you know, lower tiered clients, the ones who are more time consuming but not as much revenue producing. They're ones that can grow and develop with the firm and bring in more business. But quite frequently, they hire these advisors and they become glorified admins or scribes. No, the idea is that you want them to be able to be self-sufficient. They should be able to sit in the meetings and support you, but you should also be able to coach them. And part of it is working on building that relationship so both sides actually understand each other well and there's not misunderstood expectations. I think there's a great opportunity with new and upcoming advisors to learn and, like I said, roll up their sleeves and get into the weeds and understand e-money or Money Guide Pro or Orion or Black Diamond or Tamarack or whatever it is that they're using and really, really leverage these tools for better. But I also think there's opportunities for the senior advisors, the CEOs to really be like, hey, this is a way that you can learn to provide value to clients. This is how we talk to them, or these are the follow-ups, or these are the priorities that we want to address. But how can we do this efficiently? Most of the time, it isn't like that. It's prep the meeting, put in the notes, put in the action items. Okay, what's next? There's not a lot of coaching going on. And I think anybody that has ever had a really good coach or a really good teacher can see how impactful they are in really helping this person to really clear the bar. And I think a big part of what I think is a lot of people can actually clear the bar, but they're not given the shoes and the pole to actually vault over it. And I want to be able to provide that.
And it's too, a lot of firms experience turnover in those style roles because the CEOs typically are great at casting a vision, but then they blink and 2 or 3 years have passed. They haven't done anything to help that hire progress through their
Exactly.
career due to a lack of coaching. And therefore they move on and do something else. And then they're back to square one. So there's this constant like, push and pull and back and forth. And, they need to figure that stuff out. So I think what you do is super helpful and much needed. And I know that it's a quality over quantity type engagement, but I think we need to replicate you, Tammy. So we got to figure that out. But with that being
When
said,
I
I do
figure that
want
out, I'll let you
to
know.
okay, please do. With that being said, let's transition. One of the things that we ask all of our guests is a book that's had an impact on them. And for those of you who are listening in, and this may be your first episode, the reason why we do this is to distill a reading list for all of you. And I actually have not come across this book, so I'm curious to understand the impact that it's had on you, Tammy, but it's called Hidden Potential by Adam Grant.
Yeah.
Tell us why you picked that.
I think a big reason that I picked that was because it resonated with a lot of my life. I was not expected to have a career in financial services. Again, English major in college. When people ask me, or when people find out that I have spent my entire career in financial services, they're like, oh, you must have been really into this when you were a kid. I'm like, no, when I was 12, they said, you need to learn about the stock market, handed us a newspaper. And like most 12-year-olds, I picked what I knew. So I picked Pepsi. But that was it. I think I've been able to understand my strengths as I've leaned in and had coaching and been able to see potential because somebody else saw potential in me. And I want to be able to do that for other people. And so I think Adam Grant's book does that really, really well in really helping people to see what was missed the first time around.
Well, yeah, and two, I think you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job with that now and what you offer folks. And you come in and you're helping unlock whatever that hidden potential is, going back to a prior part of our conversation as it relates to, them being on the wrong seat on the bus tends to help a lot. So I think it's cool to see that this book is not only reflective for you as it relates to your own journey and kind of upbringing throughout your professional career, but now you're using that same, you're reflecting and understanding that same impact that it's had on you and paying that forward with the teams that you're tasked with actually helping and bringing to the next level and unlocking their hidden potential also. So it's really cool to see that this book, there's both some hindsight and foresight with it to, with your upbringing and ultimately the impact that you're having on people as well.
And it's a really fun read. So I encourage anybody to check it out. I think whether you work in financial services or you don't, there's a lot there that's really applicable.
Love it. Well, Tammy, this has been an absolute pleasure. And if I'm an advisor, I'm a firm owner, and I am interested, intrigued, and curious about what you do and want to connect with you. I know your website is RIASIE.com, Riasi. If again, I'm hopeful I'm pronouncing that
Yep.
correctly, but
You're awesome.
Riasi.com. Is there anywhere else that you'd like to send them, or is that the main
That's
spot?
the main website. My email is tammy@riossi.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, Tammy, it was a pleasure having you. For everyone listening, I really appreciate you tuning in. And as I mentioned, Tammy, I have someone in mind that I think you may be a perfect fit for. So I'll be sure to share this episode with them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise. Take care.